The Motivational Mindset Podcast with Switch Motivation.
Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Motivational Mindset Podcast. My name is Richard Knight and this week I'm speaking to Simon Hallam, owner and director of Spectacled Owl Training and Development. Simon talks to us all about his pharmaceutical sales days and his transition into helping others develop. Enjoy.
So I'm Simon Hallam, as Richard's just ably told us all. And I own a training development company called Spectacled Owl. Bit of a strange name, more on that maybe later.
Good.
So I collaborate with various other training development providers and also do my own stuff. And that stuff is basically hinged around three different areas. So leadership training for managers, both senior managers, directors, and junior managers. Partly because I think leadership is one of the areas where everybody can learn and excel in if they apply themselves and the correct tools at the right time. And I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about kind of the right intervention at the right time for the right person. So leadership should not be a sort of, this is how I lead people. This is how I think I need to lead this individual. Given the perspective of the team and other people that they might need to collaborate with. So that's the first sort of area I would suggest. The second one, I think, comes from a personal passion for coaching and feedback, which I see as sort of different sides of the same coin, really, when you look at how people develop and how they understand a little bit more about themselves. Then feedback is the springboard, I suppose, to help that, and coaching is the energy behind what happens next.
Yeah.
And so that's a sort of second piece, again, maybe more on especially on the feedback bit, because I think it's a real opportunity, an extraordinary opportunity for a lot of people to understand how they're perceived by other people. Really does help to engage them in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and help them to progress in their careers, whatever they might be doing. And the third bit is team development. So, and I include team motivation in that. Obviously, individual motivation is really important for people, understanding your own motivators, and trying to kind of mesh that in with the role that you have, and ensure that those motivators or the key motivators are satisfied, not only with the individual, but also within the team. And one thing which I've noticed just recently, in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, is people understanding their motivators and then working from that to work within a team to create a vision and some non-negotiables about how the team communicate, how they own things, what they're working on, and kind of how they do it, how they work together so they can keep each other honest, and again provide a little bit of feedback along the way. Those are kind of the three different areas. So leadership, coaching and feedback, and also sort of motivation, team development. Yeah, those are three main areas. I mean, I'll do other things if I'm asked, but those are the sort of parts of expertise that I would normally work with organisations on. Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of, so why that stuff now? Because you've had your career hasn't always been in that sort of that side of things, has it? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I think if I'm really honest, when I started as sort of a proper job, I sort of fell into it. A lot of other people were talking about pharmaceutical companies and becoming a medical representative. So I gave that a go, and it kind of worked out, really, I suppose. And I think there's a couple of things that I would say on that. In that I didn't know it at the time, but actually it's just a really nice industry to work in. which I really enjoyed. There's decent people. You're dealing with doctors and nurses, and some can be awkward, but the majority, I think, have the best interests of patients at heart. And so it was a good industry, I think, to school communication skills,
Yeah.
to ensure that that I was doing my best. I think to given the skills that I had at the time from university and my upbringing. And it was really interesting because, of course, you are ultimately, which I've only really understood in the last 20 years, probably. Ultimately, you're helping people in a way, whether people agree with, people taking medication or not.
Yeah.
I think if you're a psychologist, you're helping somebody without necessarily relying on drugs. And I think, that as we kind of progress as a society, I think probably both of those things are really helpful for different things. So I sort of got this sense of the, it's a really nice job to have, and it was fine from a remuneration perspective. We had our children at the two young children at the time. It enabled me to get a house and all that sort of stuff, which it is part of society, I suppose. Whether we agree with it or not, some people don't particularly subscribe to that, but I did, and I do. So it sort of gave me a really good start, and the first sort of 12 years was selling, essentially. So
Okay. Yeah.
what I noticed was kind of about year sort of 7 or 8.
Yeah.
I think, again, if I'm really honest, I started to get a little bit. I don't know whether jaded is the right term, but a little bit. Is there more? And I found the more
Yeah.
in not only selling but also helping others to do the same.
Yeah.
And there was a role in the company I was working with at the time that was kind of helping to develop other people who were either new or fairly new, and they wanted some tips and techniques, all that sort of thing. Now I honestly was not the best salesperson in the world. I'd only consider myself as being average, but I
Yeah.
think what really helped was that I liked people generally. I've always been like that. Even now on a dog walk, I'm the one who's chatting to people who have other dogs, whilst my wife sort of isn't particularly interested in that sort of
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
which is fine. It's just different people, but I've always been like that, and
Yeah.
I found myself engaging with other people, um, and wanting to support them as well, and just being interested in what they were thinking and the processes. And I think, that lends itself to a very inquiring mind, even now, still. And we'll talk about motivators later on, but
Yeah.
the expert motivator is very much this kind of thirst for understanding, for wanting to know how things work, including people
Yeah.
as well, and what makes people do what they do, and all that sort of thing.
Sorry to interrupt. So it's a really interesting point you made as well. My background's very similar to yours in terms of pharmaceutical industry, as you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
And having been a salesperson myself, I totally get that idea. I got to a point where I was like, yeah, there's something not quite right here. There's not enough energy for me to go out on a daily basis because, back in the day when we were doing the selling, it's very different now because of technology and COVID and lots of other things have changed the industry massively from a pharmaceutical point of view. But back in the day, it was quite a lonely existence as well, wasn't it? So from your point of view, how did you cope with that being out on the road? And although you're speaking to people, it's your diary, you've got to make stuff happen. Was that easy for you? How did you get around that? Because you sound like you're a very sociable person in terms of where you get your energies from. So how did that work for you?
yeah. It's a really good point, and I think one of the things that really helped me was going out and doing the job.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to have great relationships with not only the doctors and the nurses, but also the receptionists and the practice staff. And I really enjoyed those conversations. It was just conversing. That's what I wanted to do, really. I think, and it was always good to listen to what people had to say about, how their jobs were going, and what the particular challenges they were facing were, whether they were a dispensing practice or a, kind of a standard practice. And I think you're absolutely right. It could be a really lonely job. And what I found was that when people get to, or in those days, this is going back to 1998 to probably the year 2000, that I sold. People would come and join the company, be very, ambitious and motivated.
Yeah.
Initially, and they get to 6 months and they think, actually, this isn't quite the job that I thought it would be. It wasn't quite as easy as people thought it might be, and that initial flush of energy would be kind of rubbed off, because if it was difficult to get in to see somebody, it meant you couldn't do your job, you couldn't do what you were paid to do, and there was quite a lot of pressure in those days. And I think the communication is a really important one, Richard, because nowadays you can contact anybody at any time on pretty much any device. And those were the days, and it was only really latterly. I mean, I remember getting a car phone installed, and it was just a phone. It wasn't. It was like having a home phone back in the day in your car. That there was no sort of social media or anything like that, and I loved it because you could talk to people on the go. And before that happened, though, which was probably, I don't know, it must have been about 94, something like that. So it was about 6 years. I remember going in with the phone cards into the good old red boxes that used to be on every street corner, to call people, whilst I was on the road, to see if I could see somebody, or just to pop in to chat to the practice manager or whatever it might be. And that was the only way you could communicate with people. That was it. When you were out and about, apart from actually driving and going and seeing people. So it was quite a interesting in that it was I mean, you could drive sort of for an hour, and there'd be nobody to see at the end of it. Now, that, in my view, now is a complete waste of time, of course. Unless you do something whilst you're there to help you to get some sort of contact in the future. But there was this bizarre sort of habit, I suppose, that was driven mostly by people used to open their books for, take representative bookings for the next year on one morning. And of course, all the representatives in the area would flood this particular surgery on this day, no matter how far they'd driven. And once the book was filled up, that was it. It was filled up. And there's not a lot you could do about it in a standard way. I mean, you could see people outside of that at postgraduate meetings or training meetings for doctors and nurses and all that sort of thing. But that sort of formality, and it was such a waste of time in many ways. Whereas now, people can text, pick up the phone, email. Of course, we had no email either. So. For probably 7 or 8 years.
It's probably not a bad thing, to be perfectly honest, with the amount of emails buzzing around now.
All we do now is complain about it. Yeah, no,
exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? In terms of that, wanting to do your job, not being able to. And then having to realize that part of your job is actually getting in to see somebody. So I think that from a motivational point of view is really quite interesting. It's understanding actually what the requirements are of you from a work environment. And often it's missed because you only get the job advert, which is you go out and sell a product to a doctor and they will then prescribe it for patients and patients who will get better and have a good quality of life and all of these marvelous things. That's brilliant. But that frustration, and I felt it a lot, not being able to get in and see people, not having the right, tricks or the way to be able to do it. And you could see other people were being able to do it. They have that cheeky chappy approach, go on, let me in and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas there's lots of other people who say, well, that's not the way I work. That's not my personality. That doesn't give me energy. Doing that sort of thing isn't right. I want to be able to be the expert in what I'm going to do. I want to make a difference, but I want to do it within the right parameters. I don't want to stray beyond and push the boundaries. That's not me. So it does make
Yes.
a big difference across any job, and we can put it across any job, because a lot of people say, oh, you could tell a pharmaceutical representative that's their type, but actually, no, it's not.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember very, very expert driven, so wanting to know everything about their drug. And lots of doctors loved those sort of representatives because they knew every answer. They knew it all, versus a very much more sort of sociable, conversational, how's the family, getting to know people on a different level, and then having more of a in-depth conversation later down the line. So the motivation, the energy that you have for the different types of person in different roles is quite distinct. There's not a one size fits all in terms of that motivation for a job.
Yeah,
Don't
you're
know how
absolutely
you
right,
understand that.
and I think it's the same for the customers or for everybody else,
Yeah.
on the planet, pretty much. That people are motivated differently, and even if they have the same motivators, it shows up differently depending upon, their upbringing, their experience, their lived life. So,
Okay. Yeah.
and I think that I only began noticing that I needed, slightly different approaches for different customers. Well into my job, probably 3 or 4 years. That some people wanted as you say, the expertise around how a brand or a product actually worked,
Yeah.
and what the efficacy and the side effects were of a particular brand compared to another brand.
Hmm.
And obviously you've got to be honest in that given situation, and
Yeah.
and other people did just want to see you for a chat and do things in a much more sort of chatty conversational
Hmm.
way. And there was an element of, some people really trusted you, I think, and other people didn't. And
Yeah.
that's fine. I think that's absolutely fine. That's what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. It just, that um difference of, I mean, 8 billion souls on the planet, and every one of us are unique. So,
Amazing.
we should be thinking about how we communicate and connect with everybody differently, or, how they want to be communicated with rather than how we want to be communicated with.
Hmm.
I think that's a big lesson that I've learned over the years of, working in the industry that I have done and I do now. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I suppose that sort of moves us towards that. Your the fact that in your work you're talking about leadership being for at the right time and for the right person and all that sort
Mm,
of thing. That clearly makes a big difference, doesn't it? In terms of, we're talking about motivators, different people want to interact in different ways, and motivationally, it must be really interesting from a leadership point of view. If you are leading teams, well, of course, because leadership can be leadership from within a team or leadership from with a title, so a management leader as well. So that there's the difference
yeah.
there as well.
Yeah.
But how does that come across in your sort of experience? What do you see in terms of the different leaders? How different is leadership? Or is there just a set number of things that you have to focus on?
Yeah, I don't, I don't think that will ever be answered, to be honest. And so I think this is grounded in my own belief that everybody can lead um, anybody else.
Hmm.
So, whether you run a pub or a multinational global organization, there will be some things that those leaders are doing if they're getting it right. And those things are, the biggest one for me, I think, is listening to people.
Yeah.
Probably the next one is kind of knowing what you're doing in terms of the direction of the pub or the multinational organ, having some real clarity,
Yeah.
and then understanding that you need people around you to do their jobs brilliantly too. So, I mean, a classic one, you look at Steve Jobs. He didn't come up with everything. He was a brilliant presenter In my view, some people might not have liked his sort of pictures on the, behind him when he was presenting on stage. But he had a great team around him. And I think that's it's about finding what's great in the people around you. If you're a leader, that's what makes the biggest difference. That's what makes the team the one that people want to join.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes the team successful. And the other thing that I would say, probably the third thing, is this element of trust. So, trusting in people and knowing what that means. So, trust in my head is around credibility. So, be honest about what you know and what you don't know, having the relevant information to hand when you need to have it, kind of knowing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, doing what you say you're going to do. So this element of reliability, doing what you say you're going to do, not letting people down. And we're human, right? So we sometimes do that, but just doing it, minimizing that as much as possible, and then that sort of connection. But knowing people and knowing when people are having a bad day or a good day, and trying your best to understand what's going on for people. I think that sort of human, vulnerable side is really gathering pace in leadership circles, and quite rightly. Yeah.
Lots and lots of talk about that vulnerability piece, and actually, but you are human, therefore you've got to interact on that level.
Yeah, and everybody makes mistakes, including all CEOs make mistakes. And I think just being honest about that and saying, look, sorry, I got that wrong, or look, I need some help here. I'm not sure what to do in this particular situation. This is new for me. Help me out. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yet we still see leadership, a lot of examples of leadership, still that very, I can't show any weakness. This is what you do.
You're right.
So
yeah.
why is that still happening then? Because we know all of this great stuff, don't we? What you've just spoken about, listening and having direction and trusting. Well, if we know this, then why isn't it happening? And is that to do with people perhaps not being in the right jobs for their motivators? They're not actually in the right
it could
place?
well be. It could well be. I think that sometimes and I've sat in various organisations on management team meetings, and sometimes I've been sort of a little bit taken aback by.
Hello, hope you're enjoying this episode. When you've finished, why not subscribe to the Motivational Mindset podcast to learn more about motivation in business and beyond. Thanks. Now, back to the podcast.
The fact that when managers get together, that they tend to moan, which is fine, as well as, that's okay. But it's, what really sort of irks me is when the moaning gets into sort of blaming people for, all their rubbish, or generalizing about the people that they serve. Really. So I think what causes that is people are fearful of not being seen as strong.
Yeah.
A strong leader. So I've got this problem, I need to fix it. This is what I'm going to do. And this isn't acceptable, rather than sort of saying, actually, I'm not sure what I need to do here. I've got this situation. It'd be great if we could talk about this so that we can manage this together. It tends to be also driven, I think, partly from measures.
Okay.
So if a team isn't performing, there are still some organisations which will ramp up the pressure. And that might be the right thing to do, but it's probably it's very one-dimensional. We need to understand what's going on with the performance, and kind of pick that apart first, and understand who's responsible for what, and sort of at least try and seek some more information, because the more information you have, the more you can then interpret that information to do the best thing for the business and the people that the business serve. So I think it's probably those two things, but it could be many more different elements as well. It could be a bit of pride that creeps in. And I think one of the great things, which, and this may be a little bit controversial, but I've noticed since there have been more women CEOs and women in charge of organizations and departments, that there seems to be a little bit more kind of understanding that is going on. So there's it's a little bit different. The dynamic is a little bit different, and I think to sort of take some of the lessons from that can be quite helpful. So there's more, probably a little bit more emotional intelligence going on. I wonder why this is happening. Let's look at the person rather than just what what product they might be delivering, or what numbers they should be delivering.
Yeah.
So I think that's been quite interesting to see, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, no, it often harks back to the whole sort of a caveman type thing, doesn't it? The blokes out there, hunters. So therefore,
Yeah.
you've got one target, you're going for it. You zone everything out
Yeah,
outside of your peripheral, and then
yeah.
you've got your gatherers who are traditionally female, who then come through. Now that's been spoken about many, many times over the years. But I agree. I think there is a difference in that leadership piece. Now, is that always going to be the case? Can blokes lead in that same way, or is that possible? Is that
I
teachable?
absolutely think they can, but they need to work at it more, and it's
Yeah.
having that sort of emotional context.
Yeah.
And this is not to say, what I'm not trying to do is saying that men can't be emotional, and women
Yeah.
always can.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are, that people, every human being has the ability to speak, to be upset, to be happy, to be sad, to be, the whole range of emotions. And I just think that there are some people that are better at connecting with those sorts of things.
Great.
And,
Yeah.
it may be a little bit, I'm not saying that women are better at doing that, but I just think they're more aware of it.
Yeah.
And as you say, I think men are probably better at being, focused on one thing,
Yeah.
and keeping that as the focus. And of course, there are problems with that.
Yes, because things change.
Because things change, and what the approach that, and what I find is the best leaders, whether they be men or women, are ones that kind of look at themselves and understand what's happened, what's made them who they are, and also think about the people that are around them, and connect with those people on a deeper level. That sort of connection is really, really important. It's almost like an intimacy where somebody well enough so that they can come to you with an issue or a challenge and a problem. And anybody can learn how to do that, of course, but those basic things of men and women are different. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't learn the good from one and the good from the other, and kind of mash them together.
Oh no, absolutely. And I think that sort of comes again back to your point earlier on about feedback, and you started to mention around that whole, how we're perceived by others. So it'd be interesting just to explore that a little bit now in terms of that sort of motivational piece. So, as part of a team, and I've seen it, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have seen it over the years, is that you're sitting in a team or you're sitting in an organization and you're looking at that leader and you're thinking, well, they're way off the mark. They don't know what's going on. They're not having conversations. They're not doing all these things. But we, as ever, in that organizational setup, are but a small cog. So is it my job to be having those sort of conversations? Does feedback fall in there? The many times, in fact, I've left organizations because of leaders and not been able to give feedback, even though they come up with those fantastic words of, yes, my door is always open. My door is always open. You can, anytime you can come on in. So why don't we? Why don't we go in and tell people?
Yeah, so I think there's this perception that the door is always open to things that I want to hear.
Yeah.
Rather than the door is really open. I want to become a better leader. I want to become better at this, and I need to know how I'm perceived and what I'm doing is that's working, what I'm doing that's not working, so that we can continue to increase or enhance, should I say, the high performance culture. So I've got a, and I've said this earlier, I've got a real bee in my bonnet about feedback. So people are often, so they're usually very happy to give positive feedback. I think let's say that. So, and that's good. That's useful, right? And I think there's this perception, and it still exists, that having somebody tell you what they have seen and they think it could have been done better is a bad thing. It's not. You know, someone wants to make you better at your role, your job. You know, wants to enhance your skills, to make you more marketable, to make you more effective. What is the problem with that? I don't, you know, and you know, this is the age-old saying that that feedback is the breakfast of champions, and you know, I really think that when people, and we see this in the motivators, so you look at the star motivator and the searcher motivator to a degree as well, that you know, feedback's really important to know that I'm making a difference, or to know that I'm still, you know, I'm still doing a good job, that I'm still kind of top of the tree, you know, etc., with regards to you know, needing to be needed, and you know, doing a really good job, even though it might be a really small element, and you know, annoy the heck out of somebody else, you know, when somebody's constantly asking for feedback. But that's what somebody needs, and that should be given. So there's a part of me which understands that feedback is, especially constructive feedback, so i.e. where somebody isn't performing, so whether either performance or behavior falls below the mark, well, that's tough to do, but it's practice, it's knowing you know, how to do it, and it's about, you know, having practice and preparing for that properly. And you know, lots and lots of managers, because it's usually managers that do it, although it doesn't have to be. You know, in my view, when I've talked to teams about communication and other non-negotiables in terms of how they work together, you know, I always encourage them to give feedback to each other, or to have high quality feedback as part of the conversation, because it just makes people better. It kind of takes the heat off the manager. You know, the manager shouldn't be expected to do absolutely everything. And all the brilliant teams out there, often feedback is free flowing. And you know, one way to shortcut this issue is if people ask for feedback much more than they regularly do from people that they trust. It's a really great way to shortcut that, because the person who's giving them the feedback gets to practice, and the person who's receiving the feedback gets better at their job. So it really is a win-win. So it's knowing how to do it, and it's having the time to prepare and practice. Those are the important things, I think. But it's, you know, in my view, there is an extraordinary opportunity right now for people to get serious around feedback and institute feedback as part of a sort of coaching conversation, as part of a development conversation. And some people are really good at doing it. Don't get me wrong, but you know, if you catch somebody, all the managers out there, if you catch somebody doing something well, tell them, and tell them what it was that you saw. And do it in these two ways. So first thing is recognizing them. So recognition, to recognize them for the task that they've completed and done a good job in. And the second thing is appreciating them and how they've done it. So recognition and appreciation is really important when you're giving positive feedback. When you catch somebody, if they're doing a presentation and they've not asked you for feedback, then just to tell them what you've seen. It is really useful, actually. And, you know, potentially just suggest and, you know, add in some things which you think will be helpful for them. It's just having a human conversation with somebody so that they can get better at their job. And there are various, we're not going to go into the processes as to how to give feedback. There's a couple of models that I use, which I swear by, but you can contact me, you know, if you want to hear about that.
more info, then absolutely get in contact with you about that sort of thing. So I think the feedback piece is really interesting. And I'm big into the sport and stuff like that, and I always think about from the sporting point of view. Feedback is a constant from a sport and performance point of view. You've got somebody who stood on the touchline or stood next to the running track, or wherever it is, looking at every single step you're taking, every single movement of a muscle, to make sure that your jump, high jump is higher, or whatever it is, and then it's fed back. And in that sort of environment, it's like, well, that's expected, isn't it? So there's almost this, we need to bring the world of work in line with other things outside of work to say it's okay. This is fine. It is from a positive standpoint. And that's the thing I always remember about feedback. And it works really well from my personal motivational point of view, and I know others, is it is coming from a good place. I am not feeding back to, point fingers.
Feeding back just to annoy you.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, from an organizational point of view, over the years, you spoke about measurement earlier on, measures are put in place because it enables somebody to almost justify their job at a higher level, if you like. So we'll get you to fill in a spreadsheet. Why? Well, because I need it to justify what I'm doing. Yeah, but it's not enhancing what I'm doing in my level. So, there's all of those sort of things that get in the way as well. But I think feedback as a tool of, that's great. However, we can go further. You can go into other places. A really, really, great place to be. And it works well with motivators. I didn't mention to our listeners actually that Simon is a motivational map practitioner, similar to myself, but also sees and uses the motivational maps in various guises. From your point of view, those motivational maps, how does that work from a feedback point of view? Do you have to give feedback in different ways if people are motivated in a different way?
Well, so I think yes, but I mean, if people don't like the feedback that you're giving them, you can ask them why, and learn along the way. If you get it wrong, that's okay. It's all right. Let's try and get it right first time. But if you don't, then ask for feedback, based on the feedback that you've given, and it'll get better. Right. So, and so I think, yes, if somebody is motivated by the searcher motivator, for example, if that's their top motivator, which is all around, purpose, making a difference, wanting to be involved in quality, critical work, almost wanting to be at the center of things that are meaningful and purposeful, then to use some of those words or similar words, can be really helpful, and to coach around that after you've given somebody the feedback. Yeah, absolutely, that they can be used. And I think the language of motivational maps is really useful. It's one of the tools that I use most of all, actually, now. And it's not to say that other tools aren't really useful, but I think as a relatively new tool, when you consider that 70% of the global workforce is motivated, allegedly, that's 83% of people who aren't. So let's try and do something about that. And I'm not sitting here saying that everybody should be motivated at all the time, because I'm certainly not. And I'm a massive fan of motivational maps, and my own motivators help me to understand how I'm feeling about a particular piece of work, for example, and what I can do to satisfy my own motivators as much as possible. So I've got various techniques, but that, even if somebody's got the same motivational map as I have, it will show up a little bit differently for them. It will be a little bit different for them because they are a different person. So it's about understanding, what the motivators mean to the person. But I think there's something else here, Richard, which is about that knowing your motivators isn't enough. So being satisfied in your top 3 motivators is useful, is really useful. And, through the motivational map questionnaire and report and debrief that both you and I do, that can be a really helpful conversation. But I think there's something else, this word that we use quite often, which is discipline. So motivators, understanding your motivators is not as useful unless you have real discipline
Right.
in going back to them and having conversations about that. So, going back to them and understanding what it is that you can do in your role, having some time to think about it. So let me give you an example with my expert motivator. Um, I think the discipline of me on a Monday morning, or in this case, because we had a bank holiday, Tuesday morning, thinking about what's coming this week
Yeah.
and what I need to think about, what have I got to work through before I have a call or a session or a team discussion, thinking about how I'm going to retain my own satisfaction and enhance my own satisfaction doesn't just happen by me just doing what I normally do. It happens through me thinking about it and acting based on how I'm feeling and what's coming up. So a practical example is if I'm doing some paperwork, which I don't particularly enjoy, um, and when I say paperwork, I mean, working on the laptop.
Yeah.
I will usually surround that with things that I do enjoy, and that's a discipline that I have. So, it might be doing something, interesting, or kind of maybe thinking about a new coaching project,
Hmm.
um, and it might be a face-to-face coaching discussion.
Right.
So I've got something to look forward to that I know I'm going to really enjoy,
Yeah.
but based around the thing that I don't necessarily enjoy that much.
Yeah.
And that really helps. So it's having that discipline,
Yeah.
I think, that really helps the motivators, and
Yeah.
having motivation in your mind day in, day out
Hmm.
doesn't cost any time at all. Really, if I'm
Right.
if I'm honest,
Yeah.
5 minutes a day
Yeah.
is enough.
Yeah. And the impact that can have is quite significant. And it's really interesting because that goes back to the leadership piece.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, and I talk quite a bit at the moment about, making sure that you as an individual are in the right place, being selfish about your motivation.
Yeah.
And you alluded to it there, going back to the what motivates you and making sure that what you're doing is actually giving you energy. Because if it isn't, as a leader, you are going to be reducing your performance levels quite significantly. And I've seen that over the years. People are in management positions, leadership positions, and they don't want to be there. It
Yeah,
doesn't give them
absolutely.
energy.
Yeah.
It doesn't fill them with a fire, a passion. It's almost this. And to your point, managers get together and they start moaning. It's like, well, so are you in the right place? And it's quite a challenging concept to get your head round. Actually, am I doing what I need to be doing to fulfill myself as an individual?
Yes, yes. It's really important. Really important. Yeah.
Mm, mm. It's quite a significant piece, I think. In terms of that, the way you everybody you're then working with, even if you're not a leader with a title, if you're leading within a group, you're part of a team, and you're doing your best to make a big difference. It can quite significantly change if you're losing sight of what's giving you your energy, what is your motive for doing that role.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely right. And we see this, week in, week out with people that we work with. There are some people who relish the challenge of teams, and other people who don't.
Mm.
And it's not to say that one is better at leading than the other one, but the key these key things come back, don't they? That element of trust that you have within people, the autonomy, the
Mhm.
expectation that people, where appropriate, can be delegated to, the belief in people that they can be, the best at that particular job, um, and also, helping. And this is where the coaching piece comes in, of course, helping people to understand that you believe in them, sometimes more than they believe in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
it is really important, and being human about everything, just having that human element is so important, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think it looks like we are marching through time as ever, because that's always the one
Yes.
constant. But yeah, thanks ever so much for your time today, Simon. It's brilliant to chat to you. As I ask all of my
Mm,
guests on
yeah.
the podcast, from your point of view, if there's one thing that you can leave the listeners with in terms of motivation and how to keep it focused and all of those sort of things, what would be that tip for them we can leave with them today?
So if there was one tip, I would say understand the motivators and be disciplined in applying satisfaction techniques. Right. That's what I would say. Yeah.
And in terms of those motivators, you don't necessarily have to do something as formal as a motivational map. It's understanding. Well, I presume your comment you're making there is about thinking about what you do at work and what gives you that joy.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, and why was that the bit that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look anywhere, if you go anywhere, if we all have one thing in common, that is that we're all customers, right? So when we go out shopping, mm-hmm. let's say, for you in Salisbury, for me in Dorset, wherever we go, that there is an element of some people clearly love selling to folks like us, mm-hmm. and other people don't. Yeah. You go into a supermarket or a farm shop or a car dealership. Yeah. There are some people that just connect with you and they're interested in you, and I think that's that's where we're trying to get to, mm-hmm. to make the experience much more beneficial for the person who's actually shelling out some cash for a service or a product or whatever. Yeah. So may I just say, if anybody's interested and wants to continue the conversation, continue talking, then do please reach out on LinkedIn. I'm Simon Hallam from Spectacled Owl Training and Development Consultancy.
Just before we go,
yes,
Spectacled Owl, you said you'd let us know about that one.
Oh yeah, well, so my wife came up with the idea because she knows me obviously well, and she said that what you love giving advice of and it's not just that I think I'm right, it's that some of the advice I give is quite useful and practical. And also helping people to reflect and sort of hold a mirror up in a particular situation to get them to think about their own life and their own behavior and their own beliefs and values, all those sorts of things, and motivators. And so it's based on vision and wisdom. So the vision piece is that sort of holding up the mirror, and the wisdom bit is, right, let's do something about this. What can we do that will help you to overcome this particular challenge or continue to be excited in this particular challenge? So the vision and wisdom, and the obvious name was Spectacled Owl, which is a real thing, by the way. So who knows, maybe in the future there'll be an affiliate company called the Spectacled Bear or something like that. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it.
Exactly.
Focusing on all of that then. Simon, thanks ever so much. Great to speak to you.
Thank you, Richard.
Speak to you soon.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
This was a Switch Motivation production from Switch Performance Limited. Music by Dennis Kischuk from Pixabay. The Motivational Mindset Podcast. Download, listen, subscribe